Minutes away. Hours of fun. Enjoy a taste of Santa Barbara. Experience the romance. Stearns Wharf. Playing near you.
Okay, good evening. I would like to call tonight's July 21st City of Santa Barbara Harbor Commission meeting to order. And Ms. Przinski, would you call roll, please?
Yes, Bill Spicer.
Here.
Jim Sloan. Here. Betsy Kramer. Here. Merritt McCrae.
Here.
Stephen McIntosh and Lang Sly are absent.
Excellent. Good to know. This is the time, let's see, actually, no, this is changes to the agenda. Mr. Reedman.
Mr. Chair, there are no changes tonight.
Very good. Thank you. Public comments on anything not on the agenda. Doesn't appear. I don't have any slips, so I will open and close that. We will move to approval of the minutes from 2 months ago, actually. Is there a recommendation?
So moved.
There's a first.
I have to abstain.
I will second that. So we will vote to approve the minutes. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Nays? Abstentions?
I'm abstaining. I wasn't here.
Did you get that too? Okay. Okay. By the narrowest of margins, we have the minutes approved. Moving on to commission matters, and before we get to that, I just wanted to make one quick comment. Because we did not have a June meeting, we did not get to say goodbye to Commissioner Banteland, and I just wanted to recognize that. And I know staff recognized it and took care of him, but I just wanted to tell Corey and let the public know what a great service he was for our commission, and we greatly appreciated his time here. So with that, we move to the elections of chair and vice chair.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes.
I think at this point it would be appropriate to seat Merritt McRae, our new commissioner.
Yes,
and,
thank you.
And then we can move on to the rest of the Harbor Commission business.
Yes, please do.
Merritt was appointed by the council in June. He served on the regional stakeholder group under the Southern California Marine Life Protection Act initiative process as a group co-lead and helped design Southern California's marine protected areas. Served on the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary Marine Reserve Working Group, where he designed Channel Islands MPA system. Currently serves as Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary on the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary's Sanctuary Advisory Committee. As a teenager, he commercial fished out of Santa Barbara as well, both hook and line and gillnet, and has been an active United States Coast Guard licensed captain since 1978. He's been captain out of this harbor on the Hornet, the Condor Express, and he owned and operated the Seahawk and later on the 65-foot Seahawk out of Sea Landing. As a member of the American Association of Underwater Scientists, he's an active professionally certified diver. He's also explored deeper waters of the Channel Islands in offshore oil platforms by manned submersible, including the Delta submarine and Deep Worker submarine down to depths of over 1,000 feet. Currently, he serves as the saltwater editor for the Southern California beat for the Western Outdoor News, so I'm always following his articles in the WAN. It's a weekly sportsman's newspaper. So please welcome Commissioner McRae to the Harbor Commission.
Excellent. Would you like to say something?
Well, I'd like to thank you all for welcoming me here, and I look forward to serving. I'm honored to be here and to be serving, and I have an awful lot of experience down on the waterfront, so I hope to put it to good use. Thank you.
We're glad to have you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Reedman. Okay, now we will move to nominations and elections of the chair and vice chair. At this time, I'd open a nomination for chair, and I happen to have one. I would like to nominate Commissioner Sloan for chair. Are there any other nominations for chair? Okay. With that, do we need a second, or do we just vote?
You could do them separately from the chair and vice chair, or if you want to do it in one swoop after nominating and.
Okay. Well, why don't we vote on the chair? Yeah. So, all in favor of Commissioner Sloan as chair, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? Any nays?
I abstain.
Very good. Very good.
Gotta keep my streak
Okay.
going.
Okay. So we have a new chair. I guess at that point, I'll let you take it from here.
Or do we start with the next meeting?
It would start with this meeting.
Oh, does it? Oh, wow. Okay.
You get to vote in the.
So in
vice.
the spirit of the peaceful transition of power, I'd like to hand over the gavel to Commissioner Sloan.
Okay. Hope I don't mess it up.
Congratulations.
Thank you. All right, so I guess the next item is to elect a vice chair. Do we have any nominations?
I haven't put anything together.
Any ideas?
Do you want to do it again?
I'd be happy to.
I'll nominate Bill Spicer then.
Okay. Any other nominations? Okay. All those in favor of Bill Spicer being vice chair, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Nays? Abstentions? Okay, looks like we passed that.
Thank you, Betsy.
Okay, where are we? Let me get back to the agenda here. Excuse me. Okay, so now it's committees. And we had a number of people that were on committees that are no longer on the board. And so we have a number of vacancies on all of the committees. Looks like we have on budget one opening, chartering and BAP one opening, dredging two openings, local coastal program update one opening, marine reconstruction two openings, parking one, and RFP one. And so do we want to go down committee by committee, or, you know, there was some discussion before the meeting opened about postponing this till next month. And so do we have any comments on that?
Yeah, I'm opposed to postponing it. It's on the agenda. It's been on the agenda every year, every July meeting, and so we've got a quorum here, and I think we should proceed.
One thought might be is we can one committee appears to have the
Conflict?
the conflict. Perhaps we hold that one out, and then we could do all the rest.
Which committee is that? I mean,
Budget committee seems to have more.
well, they're all open. All the three positions are open. They aren't necessarily.
That's correct. That's
placed
correct.
in
No, you're
stone
right.
Just
You're right.
because
You're correct.
Dennis is not on the committee
Right.
anymore.
Right.
Right. No, you're correct. You're correct. I had forgotten. I overlooked that. So why don't we start and talk about the budget committee? Does that
I'd
make-
like to be on the budget committee. I
Okay.
was before. I got off it last time in order to give Dennis a seat on it, the newcomer, but I'd like to return to it.
Okay. I think I have some experience on there as well. And so we have both Stephen McIntosh and the new individual, Lang Slay, have also expressed interest on being on the budget committee. And so we have 4 people for 3 slots. So how should we proceed?
Guess we have to make a choice.
Okay. Well, Stephen McIntosh has expressed interest on being back on it, and so have I. So I don't think.
Maybe draw straws between Stephen and the new fellow.
Okay. What should we do a roll call for selecting 3 people? Is that how we would do it? I'm sorry, I'm a little new to this, so bear with me. Well, no, the whole committee's up for reappointment on all of these. That's what Betsy pointed out to me, and that's true. All of the committees are up for reassignment. So perhaps we should just do a roll call and ask everybody to list 3, and then if there's a conflict, we'll Rochambeau for the last one. No. Does that make sense? Is that
Yeah.
following protocol? Okay. It's up to you. You're calling roll.
Commissioner Spicer,
I would select Sloan, Kramer, and McIntosh for the budget committee.
Chair Sloan,
I would select the same 3.
Commissioner Kramer,
I don't know the new person, but I think having a new voice on the committee is a good idea, and so I'll select Sloan, Kramer, and the new person.
okay. Commissioner McCrae,
I'll select McIntosh, Sloan, and Kramer.
okay. So with taking the roll call votes, the majority seems to be Sloan, Kramer, and McIntosh as the top three selected.
Okay. Moving on to chartering and business activity permits.
I think we should tell Merritt that most
Yeah.
of these other committees have not met. Or they meet very, very irregularly. The only one who meets at all often, and that's only several times a year, is the Budget Committee. I don't know much about the local coastal program update, but that is going to be wearing out if it's not done so already, and that's met irregularly also. But the rest of these, it's sort of an ad hoc kind of thing, so just so that you know.
Well, thank you very much.
So, I mean, they're interesting topics, and they may come up. But if you sign up for them, you don't have to think that you're going to be on call every week.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, just for Merritt's benefit, Scott, if I could ask you to maybe just run through what each of these committees are and what they do, their responsibilities.
Sure. Generally, the Budget Committee, as we go into the winter and do our 2-year budget, we'll try and bring to the Budget Committee which way the winds are blowing in terms of what last year's budget was, what this year's shaping up like, and the instructions we've received from City Hall in terms of, additional expenses and things like that. So we'll try and go through the budget in a more detailed level before we bring it to the full group, so that the Budget Committee so we don't have to go through it at a micro level with the whole board. It is definitely the group that meets the most often, probably 2 or 3 times a year, sometimes more. The chartering and business activity permits, that mostly involves chartering permits, which we issue 12, and that allows private slip holders to do 6 passenger charters from their private slips. And it's kept at a limited number to not compete with the percentage rent paying tenants, Sea Landing and Santa Barbara Sailing Center primarily. And it doesn't meet as often, but when it does, it can get kind of feisty sometimes. But it's, probably every 2-3 years we have something come up there. Dredging Committee, I don't know when the last time the Dredging Committee, it really doesn't meet. Carl's doing such a good job with it, and the Corps. Local coastal program update. Jim's been very involved in that. It's been somewhat delayed, considerably delayed. The Coastal Commission kicked it back and wants a lot of changes, and they're going through some changes there too. But this will go away once the local coastal plan is revised and updated. We do have an opening there, and that has been meeting quarterly, probably.
Yeah, there was more activity towards the beginning of the year, and then we had a lull, and we just had a
meeting, yeah. So that one's going. Marina reconstruction, really, since we started the marina, we really haven't reconvened that one either. Now we're entering in on phase 7 of 8, so that we could probably dissolve that one as well, really. Parking committee, we formed as an ad hoc committee, but it's stuck around. And we will be tackling some more parking issues here this fiscal year in terms of trying to clean up the main harbor parking lot and some other issues. So there may be some activity there. And that one can get people can get pretty excited at that one too, as Bill can attest, and Betsy. But again, we haven't met in 2-3 years on that one, but I expect several meetings this year. And the request for proposal selection, again, this is when we get it's very rare. We have very little turnover at the waterfront for our real estate, for the shops and things. But when we do, we can't just do like a private landlord and pick anybody. So we go out to the public and we select business proposals, and then this committee reviews those proposals, often interviews the folks with their different business concepts, and then makes a recommendation to the full committee on who the best fit is for a marine-related zoned area. And again, it's kind of a fun one, but again, with the little turnover that we have, and I don't foresee any in the immediate future, it doesn't meet all that often, but it's kind of a fun one when it does.
So which of these are standing committees and which are ad hoc?
Well, they're pretty much all, they were all designed as standing committees, but since,
Well, the LCP is an ad hoc.
well, yeah, that's an ad hoc, and parking was designed as an ad hoc, but, and it really, it's a de facto ad hoc since it hadn't met in
Right.
3 years, as is dredging, so,
Yeah, okay. Okay, well, with that in mind,
if that helps.
any questions?
No questions. Thank you very much. It was very informative.
So chartering and BAP, does anybody,
I'm comfortable remaining.
I'm okay about remaining.
okay? Since
If
you-
if there was no one else that wants to go ahead and tackle this, I'd be glad to serve.
Sounds like you might have some experience
I
in
would
this
agree.
area that might be beneficial. Okay, so I would nominate Merritt for this. All in favor?
Absolutely.
Abstain? Did I do that right? Oh, okay. 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 So why don't we do that for the balance of the committees? Okay. The suggestion was made that we wait, we do all of these and then vote on them at once. Dredging?
I've been on this since the beginning, it's
Yeah.
never met.
Yeah, you've been doing a great job.
Mr. Chair, a suggestion, we may consider, if it pleases the commission, we may consider just dissolving that committee and reforming it if and when we should need it, but I can't even remember when we had
Okay.
that. I think we formed it back when, back in the late 90s when the Army Corps was kind of pressuring us into buying our own dredge.
Oh, right.
And I don't think I think that's why it's there, and I don't think it's met since, so certainly not since, not in a long time.
Okay.
So
I
we
think
might-
that's a good idea.
We might give some thought to possibly voting to eliminate the dredging committee and the marina reconstruction committee, since we're all but done with that.
Okay. I think that's a good idea. I'd move to mothball the dredging and the marina reconstruction committee.
Second it.
Okay, so let's move, so we'll vote on that. So that brings us to LCP. And Stephen has written that he desires to stay on there. I think I could bring some continuity to it. And I think I'd like to nominate Betsy for that committee.
I haven't been following it, so it doesn't make too much sense, so I don't know.
Well, nobody, I don't think anybody on the commission
Well, you
has.
have been following it.
Right, but
Steve
we
has
have,
been
we
following.
have an opening for the third.
Well, maybe you'd like to be on it?
I know even less than you do.
All right.
Is that,
I am fine with that.
parking? We have an opening there.
And I'm interested in remaining.
Okay.
Parking.
I'm also interested in that.
Maybe we could suggest, go ahead, Mayor.
I would be interested in doing that.
Okay. And then RFP?
Again, I'd be interested in staying.
I'd be interested in staying too, but if someone had a strong desire.
I think as Mr. Reedman mentioned, it comes and goes. We haven't met recently, but it's,
We have a new commissioner also that we might think about. Okay,
Yeah, I would be willing to do it.
Okay.
Yes.
okay, so let me summarize what I have here. So the proposal is that we dissolve the dredging and marina reconstruction committees The local coastal program update would be Commissioner McIntosh, Kramer, and myself. Parking would be Commissioners Kramer, Spicer, and I'm sorry, Merritt, I've forgotten your last name. McCray. Commissioner McCray. And then the RFP would be Commissioners McCray, myself, and Spicer. So, should,
Would put that forth as a motion.
okay. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Okay. That's how you make sausage with
I did.
committees.
Okay,
I'm sorry. Jim mentioned it. I put it forth.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I reiterated what we talked about and then the motion. Okay. So we have director's report.
Okay, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, since we last met, the council approved a 5-year lease agreement with Epic Cruises Incorporated. That's Fred and Kathy Hirschman's water taxi, the Little Toot, that goes back and forth between the harbor and the wharf. The Hirschman's 72-foot cruise boat is governed by a separate lease. So this lease the council and you approved was just for the Little Toot. The council also approved a 5-year lease agreement with one 5-year option with Francisco Aguilera, doing business as Great Pacific Ice Cream on Stearns Wharf, and also approved a 5-year lease agreement with one 5-year option with Francisco, doing business as Char West, at an initial base rent of $4,231 per month for his restaurant, also located on the wharf. Council approved a 5-year lease agreement with Dahlia and John Adams, doing business as Madame Rosenka on the wharf, and approved a consent to assignment of lease from Steve Marsh, Kevin Boss, and Beach Rock Inc., doing business as Shoreline Beach Cafe, just to Beach Rock Inc., which means Steve Marsh is now the sole owner of Shoreline Beach Cafe and Beach Rock Inc. He basically bought out his partner, Kevin Boss, and he's now the sole owner of the Shoreline Beach Cafe. The council also approved a 5-year lease agreement with a 5-year option with Stearns Wharf Inc., owned by Patrick Hartman, doing business as Old Wharf Trading Company, at an average base rent of $13,278 per month, which is adjusted seasonally for a higher rent in the busy summer months and a lower rent in the slower winter months. It's for a 2,369 square foot space on Stearns Wharf. It's our largest retail location on Stearns Wharf. Council also found it in the city's best interest to waive the formal bid procedure as authorized by the Muni Code, and authorized the General Services Manager to issue a purchase order to Big Enterprises for a replacement parking kiosk to be located on Stearns Wharf where the kiosk is currently, and that's in an amount not to exceed $43,000. So we'll be looking at, I believe Carl's very close to getting the building permits on that, and we're getting very close to replacing that dilapidated kiosk on the wharf. Council also authorized the Waterfront Director to execute a 5-year agreement between the city and Leidos, Inc. for water quality monitoring services for the Waterfront Department in an amount not to exceed $46,000 over the term of the contract, and also authorized approval of expenditures up to $4,600 for extra services that may result. And this is for our wintertime stormwater runoff monitoring program. So we've been doing this for years and years with, what's that company? SAIC. And that Leidos bought them out. And Public Works uses them as well, so we're all on the same page there. Tentative items for the August meeting are a lease agreement with Mother Stearns Candy Company out on Stearns Wharf and a lease agreement with West Marine. And that's all I have for the Director's report, unless there are any questions tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Reedman. I did have one question. On the lease for Char West, it says here that it's with John Williams.
Yes, I tried to make it a little more personal. Francisco Aguilera was a long-time employee over 25 years for John Williams.
Right, I know.
And so he bought John Williams, East Beach Grill,
Right.
Char West, and Great Pacific Ice Cream Company. He bought the corporation. So
Okay.
it's kind of odd because the corporation
Okay.
is in a person's name,
Right,
but
okay.
not Francisco's name.
Okay.
So I just
Okay.
wanted to
No,
mention
good.
Francisco's name because it is.
I'm good with that. That
It's a little
explained
bit
it.
confusing, yeah.
Yeah. I didn't see the ink, so thank you.
Yeah, it's John K. Williams, Inc. So.
Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you. Moving on to the business services report.
Okay, Mr. Bossy is on vacation this week, so I'm going to cover for him. He just completed having installed some new waterfront directional signage in 4 locations throughout the waterfront. It's basically the signs you see, the blue, I think they're about 30 inches by 30 inches on a pole, and there are usually 2 of them on a pole. And they're all over the waterfront directing pedestrians and so forth to various businesses and things. So they're in keeping with the waterfront sign program, and they're mostly along the Cabrillo Boulevard Parkway, one at the base of Stearns Wharf, one in the middle of Cabrillo Boulevard walkway across from Ambassador Park, and on the Sea Landing Walkway also, and immediately behind Los Baños Pool. And this was all an outcome of years ago of the RDA West Beach Pedestrian Improvement Project that was designed to improve the linkage between the wharf and the harbor. And the sign part of it, and frankly a number of other parts, there was a flag component and some landscaping and so forth, got pulled out of the project, and so this was just trying to get that done anyway. The harbor and wharf merchants have long wanted improved linkage between the harbor and wharf, so they're finally in place. And Marine Services, that was the most recent RFP that we did, has opened their doors, and they've got their sign up, and they're staffed. And this transformation of this business, it was Transpac Marine for many, many years. Everyone remembers Kirby Spicer. He's still around up at his house on the hill there, I believe. And the transformation started with waterfront staff replacing the old windows and doors and stripping the inside down and putting in drywall. And from there, Marine Services put in new flooring and painted and furnished the interior and really cleaned it up. You wouldn't recognize it now. They sell general and special order marine-related parts, including filters, impellers, alternator belts, etc., for boaters, and a showroom for products such as Yanmar engines and Kohler generators and outboard motors. And they also, I believe, have an exclusive on an inflatable boat line. They are going to be selling, I believe it's Yamaha outboard motors. And it's also a base for their maintenance operations in the marinas. So if you're in the area, stop by and say hi to Ariel working the front desk. You might run into Eric, although he's usually pretty fast to catch up to. And then he's got an employee now, Leland, real nice guy, working on the boats as well. So they're already growing into the new space. So we're happy to see them open. It's been a long haul. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions or comments? All right. Thank you very much. Moving on to facilities management report.
Good evening, Chairman Sloan and Commissioners. This evening I'm going to provide an update on the Harbor Patrol Boat 1 replacement, as well as Stearns Wharf guardrail. Patrol Boat 1 is a 22-foot center console boat built in 1983. I reported a few months ago that Don Radden of Radden Boat submitted a low bid of $214,000 for a new Boat 1, including firefighting capabilities, and did about the beginning of the year. We had some contractual issues to iron out, which we did after a couple of months, and we recently worked closely with Mr. Radden to revise the shop drawings, and we approved those in June, and he got right to work building the boat at Radden's Goleta Boatyard. Here's Boat 1 as we see it today. It's the workhorse of the fleet. It looks pretty good. We spent a lot of time and effort maintaining it, but it's pretty tired and time for replacement. Radden laid up the hull over the course of a couple of weeks. The hull is 22 feet long and 8 feet 6 inches wide, about 6 inches wider than the existing boat, which the officers, I think, are going to appreciate. The structural elements, such as the bulkheads and stringers, have been put in. already, as well as a lot of the compartments have been laid up. So the next thing they're going to do is they're going to install the fuel tanks, and some of those compartments actually get foam. And they've just stripped it out of the mold yesterday, so it looks pretty good. When they form it up in the hull, they put the gel coat down, so as it comes out like this, the exterior looks pretty much like a finished product right out the gate, except for bottom paint. So it looks really, really nice. The schedule is the next thing they're going to do is they're going to lay up the deck separately. They'll do that over the next couple of weeks and install that. The center console is constructed separately, and it'll be installed as a separate component. That'll be a couple of weeks later, maybe a month or so later. And then the labor-intensive stuff comes in after that. That's installing the engines and all the electronics and all the finish work, paint and finish the hull. We expect commissioning will probably begin sometime in early 2017, maybe closer to the end of the year. More or less on schedule. These things take a long time, but Radden's doing a great job, and the boat looks great. I think we're going to be really pleased once it's finished. My next item this evening is somewhat of a unique item that we're kind of soliciting some feedback from you on, although you don't really have formal review over this, and I'll go over the details in it in just a minute. The Stearns Wharf Guardrail is a project that's kind of new and unique. Stearns Wharf was acquired by the city in 1973 from the Castagnola family and their partners. It was in a somewhat dilapidated condition at the time, and after quite a few years, the city raised some funds and rebuilt it and reopened it to the public in 1981. At the time, it was code compliant. The guardrails that surround most of the wharf are no longer code compliant, and as many of the commissioners know, and I think I've reported in the past, we've incrementally been upgrading hand guardrails all around the harbor to make them code compliant. We have a lot of people come down to the waterfront, and we just want to make them safe, and so we've just been chipping away at it. And anybody who walks around Marina 1, Marinas 2, 3, and 4 can see the new handrails we've replaced there, Sea Landing, and some of those other areas. There is no guardrail around the seaward finger of Stearns Wharf, and at the time it was done to kind of preserve the character of a working wharf. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. Upgrades to the guardrail will require Architectural Board of Review and Building and Safety Division review. We've been to the ABR, Architectural Board of Review, and they've requested us to review of various alternatives. This is kind of a straightforward project. You add a few boards and you make it so there's gaps are no greater than 4 inches. Right now they're about 13 inches. But lo and behold, they want to see some alternatives taken a look at, and we'll look at those in just a few minutes. Building and Safety, we had a preliminary meeting with them, and like most people, they get out on the wharf and they say, why isn't there a guardrail out at the end? So we talked a little bit about it, preserving the historic character of a working wharf, and they suggested that we may need to install one, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. But first and foremost, I'd like to talk a little bit about what the Architectural Board of Review has asked us to do. This section here, and it doesn't say do not feed the boards everywhere, but that section is typical. We have a cap rail, 42 inches high, which is code compliant, and two 2x6s. And that's the vast majority of the rail all around the wharf looks like that. Pretty uniform. So we, to upgrade that, our staff's preferred alternative would be to add a couple of boards and space them properly, make it somewhat symmetrical and uniform. And we would essentially do that incrementally around all the wharf where there's existing guardrail, and we'll talk a little bit about where there isn't any guardrail. It's pretty typical to make things code compliant like this. We did this at the Sea Landing at the Rock Groin last year. We had 2 boards. We added a couple more, kept the same material, looks kind of the same. So that's one thing we'd looked at. When we went to the Architectural Board of Review, they were concerned that you can see through the guardrail pretty easily right now, and then when you add boards, of course, you can't see through quite as well. So they had asked us to look at a couple different things on the right and the left. One is to make the boards thinner, narrower, so you actually gain one more 4-inch slot doing it this way. Those are 2x3 boards. They're probably going to meet code for the resistance. They're a little thinner, and you put your foot up against them, and you can kind of tell a difference. The other option they wanted us to look at was using something like a 4x. This is a 4x2 vinyl coated wire. It would be heavier gauge than this and a little bigger gaps, and they wanted us to look at that as well. We're a staff position. We're a little concerned about that. That would be a big change to do for the entire wharf. But nevertheless, we're looking at these 3 alternatives, and we'll take it back to the Architectural Board of Review. The other item is related to the end, or what we call the seaward finger, or plank park. Sometimes people call it that. So Building and Safety Division review, they're likely to require justification to maintain it as a working wharf. Working wharfs don't need to have rails around them, and most working wharfs don't have rails around them for loading and offloading cargo. A seaward finger is capable of doing that right now if we were to do that. It's rarely used in that capacity anymore. The Stearns Wharf used to load and offload cargo for probably close to 100 years, and now it's more visitor serving. There's a lot of tourists, over 1 million pedestrians a year, and 250,000 cars. So that's a lot of people. It's probably one of the most heavily used wharfs anywhere in the state. So that's a serious consideration when we think about guardrails and keeping people safe. The guardrail locations, there's 3,190 feet of existing guardrail, kind of in black. It's a little bit hard to see this. And you'll notice to the left is the entrance, or Cabrillo Boulevard. On the east side, or the north, what looks like the top side, there would be no guardrail change there because that's along a roadway and we wouldn't be required to do anything there to bring it up to code. But where it's all heavy black is where we have existing rail. And at the end, the right-hand part of the drawing, there's 770 feet of guardrail that doesn't exist, and that's around the seaward finger and what we frequently call Plank Park. Here's a picture of it. Anyone who's been out there, gone fishing, or eaten at the shellfish out there, you can sit right there at the benches. It's a great unobstructed view. People really like it, and there's people really enjoy it. But there is a certain risk out there, especially when it's stormy and whatnot. And we've had a few incidents that have concerned us a bit by not having a handrail, and people bring it up quite a bit. This is a conventional working wharf. There is no handrail. This is the city pier. You see this every single day in the harbor. Loading and offloading fish, research vessels load and offload, commercial vessels load and offload. So when we talk about a working wharf, this is the conventional use of a working wharf. So the guardrail design and the limits of where we have a guardrail are under the purview of the Architectural Board of Review and the city's Building and Safety Division. It is really their sole authority to direct us on those things. Nevertheless, we've brought this before you this evening because we would appreciate your comments on those two items. And we have solicited feedback. Scott forwarded this to our wharf merchants this afternoon. We've already gotten a little bit of feedback from them on what they feel about this. And if any of you are so inclined, we'd be happy to hear how you feel about the designs. I kind of lined it up, alternative 1, 2, and 3, and the extent of where we actually have hand guardrails and where we may be required to install some, if you have any opinions about that. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to hear from you on the subject.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Treiberg. Before we get to the Stearns Wharf, I just had one question. What are we going to do with the old boat?
That's my question. Yeah.
Chair Sloan, we're gonna sell it. We'll probably keep the new boat in operation for a couple of months, work out all the bugs, make sure everything's just fine, and then it'll be sold as surplus property. Radden suggests advertising it amongst all the existing ports and harbors in the state. Mm-hmm. They could instantly put it to use.
Yep.
So
okay.
Things like we command a decent price for it.
Good. Okay, on to the, are there any other comments on that one? So on to the Stearns Wharf guardrail. Any comments or questions on that? Commissioner Kramer?
Yeah, I have some comments on the guardrail, and I think it's a long time coming, this guardrail, particularly in the seaward finger. I brought it up a year or so ago after the fellow went off the side, and I think it's really unfortunate to have a guardrail visibly. I mean, it's really neat to see the openness, but I think it's going to be quite essential for safety. So I can't make an opinion of the three things you chose because there's not enough space. I mean, I can't really visualize it. But it seems to me one consideration needs to be also for the fishermen and how things work for them. I think Frank Drew probably could give some ideas and some suggestions as to what would be the best way. But to me, I haven't fallen off the side, but I think safety has to be a primary consideration. So those would be my comments.
I would agree with Commissioner Kramer that I'm not surprised, and I agree this is a long time coming. I had a quick question for Carl. On the top of the guardrail, it's slanted, it's not flat. You can't set your beer bottle on the top of it, is that correct?
Chair Sloan, Commissioner Spicer, that's correct. Let me go back and
Okay.
show you the,
So that's at an angle.
yeah.
Okay. Well, that just helps things from not falling off.
Right,
but,
right.
These are the
But
three.
where are you going to put your beer bottle?
These are the three alternatives kind of
Yeah.
next to each other,
Yeah.
Right.
just to put it in context.
I also probably would reserve judgment a little bit. Less is more. Obviously, the less boards that obstruct any view, but I also realize that going with that wire creates a different challenge and may not be favored by your crew. So at this time, I don't have a lot of visual guidance to give you.
Commissioner McCray?
I have a few questions with respect to the proposal to put the railings up there. Would it be possible to consider keeping some sections so that they are easily removed? Say, for example, if we had the NOAA ship come in there so they could extend a ramp and perhaps swing stuff aboard without having to actually do deconstruction or come over the railing?
Chair Sloan, Commissioner McCray, I think that's a good suggestion. I think we'd either take it down and it needs to be installed so that it's structurally sound and meets code. At the same time, we should be ready to remove it if necessary. The converse of that, several years ago when the USS Reagan visited, we installed temporary rail. So we're flexible and we can make those adjustments if need be. And I think we would want to allow, as a matter of fact, we have a proposal to allow some equipment from the end of the wharf related to the desal plant coming up in the next month or two. So that's a good suggestion. I think we'll be flexible and capable of doing that regardless of how it's ultimately installed.
That sounds great. And then with respect to your options for the railings, as you have shown, your preferred option, I think, is probably, from my perspective, the way to go. In that I think that as people put their feet on stuff, the other two options would probably take a beating, the trap wire and the thinner boards.
Thank you.
So I have a couple of questions and comments. So is there a possibility of not putting up railing down at the end of the wharf?
Chair Sloan, what we've been told by the Building and Safety Division is they would likely require us to justify maintaining it as a working wharf, as working wharfs are defined. And that might be a challenge these days.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things that comes to mind is, Commissioner McCray mentioned the NOAA ship, but if for any reason the harbor was closed for an extended period of time due to shoaling or some of the other things that happened to it, that would be our only access for perhaps, the Coast Guard vessel or emergency supplies or something like that by sea. Just something to consider. I don't know if that's been considered or not, or whether that's even a possibility. The other thing would be, just a historical aspect of, some portion of that wharf has always not been covered, and that's where people fish off of. And so, I think those of us that have fished know that it's a little harder to get it up over a rail than it is just to get it up to your feet and land it. And so I wonder if that's a consideration as well.
Chair Sloan, I think those are all components of the discussion we'd have with the Building and Safety Division. There is a certain liability, and it's their job to make sure that things are built to code and that we keep the public safe. And it's their job to interpret those codes and apply them. We kind of rely on them, but we try to make the arguments both ways to make sure this is a very famous landmark. A lot of people use it and appreciate it and enjoy it the way it is. So this is one reason why we're bringing this before you is we kind of want to have this discussion, and one reason we're bringing it to ABR is we want to have this discussion and get some opinion on that.
Okay.
It's not a certainty that they would require it, but they have suggested that they would ask us to justify continuing its use as a working wharf.
Right. Okay. And then I guess I'm with Commissioner McCray that I would go for the preferred option there. I think the mesh doesn't have the aesthetics that we would be looking for as a waterfront and a city and things like that. That's just my opinion. Commissioner Kramer?
The Goleta Pier has a railing, and there's no mesh there, and there's fishing, and it's fairly, it's not really in the way. It's nicer to have something open, but maybe that could be looked at also as a possibility. I think it's just a series of boards. It's not that kind of busy scene here.
Chair Sloan, Commissioner Kramer, the Goleta Pier and the Ventura Pier, they look a lot alike. They're all boards. They have they have rail all the way around, unless I'm mistaken, but I was at the Ventura Pier just the other day checking it. The Ventura Pier isn't currently code compliant. It looks like that. Not quite.
Not quite like
but
that.
But they don't meet the code requirement of the 4-inch gap. Unfortunately, that's not a negotiable thing. It would look better if it were a 6-inch gap or an 8-inch gap. Something would be safer, but to meet code, you've got to build it to code. So it's sort of an all or nothing kind of thing. We don't have to do a project out here. We've been concerned about this condition for a long time and felt that, like I said, getting before the advisory boards and commissions to get some feedback on what the best thing to do is. Eventually, it'll have to get done. I mean, It won't last like this forever. At some point, we'd have to make a change. But so all these are compelling reasons. It's
Right.
It's a little bit of a difficult subject.
Have you looked at cable, stainless cable?
Chair Sloan, we have stainless cable rail on Sea Landing, and it looks great. It's incredibly expensive, orders of magnitude more than this. So we've looked at it, but we're not advancing it as an alternative at this time.
The Cadillac option?
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Any other comments or discussion on that?
Mr. Chair, if I may, I expect that we will have some backlash on the aesthetics, as you've noted, and of course, our ABR has the purview over that, over the aesthetics of it, and building and safety, the requirement to do it, and I'm not comfortable with it either. On the other hand, John Bridley was director for 15 years, and nobody fell off Stearns Wharf. I've been director for 5 years, and I've had 4 people fall off Stearns Wharf. I got sued once, and one of the individuals passed away.
Right.
We prevailed in the lawsuit, but, we've been looking at this, and with the amount of people we have going out there, then we've had 2 other incidents. We found a YouTube video where they were doing a prank, where they were having people pose with a guy and a fake baby doll in a stroller, and the guy would hand his camera to a passerby and say, "Will you take a picture of me and my baby?" And then somebody would pull a piece of fishing line, and the stroller would go flying off the end of the wharf. So this was circulating around in YouTube, and Carl and I were horrified. And then just a few weeks ago, there was another one where some guys faked a fist fight out on the wharf, and one of them went over the side. And all these passersby came by to see what was going on, and Harbor Patrol got called. And it's just...
So it's time to do something.
It just seems like it's moving in that direction. I think we're sort of heading for the inevitable.
Great.
And then hopefully after a while, people get used to the new look of the wharf. And
Right. Okay, great. Now, that adds some flavor to it. Thank you. Okay, any other comments on this topic? Okay. Harbor Operations, Mr. Cronman.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. I'm happy to report that we had a very, very successful Harbor Nautical Swap Meet back in May. In fact, we set a record for vendors. We had 50-plus vendors at that event, and every possible thing imaginable was for sale. I apologize, I had the wrong tab here. Everything from $100 paddle boards to boats, skiffs, motors, pumps, kayaks, everything you can imagine. It was really probably the best harbor swap meet we've had. And I think this shot here taken from a man lift probably gives you the best sense of how much stuff was out there, how many people were out there selling. And I'm happy to report also that the coffee, free coffee and donuts and fruit and bagels that were provided care of the Harbor Merchants Association actually lasted all the way to the end of the event this time, both for two reasons, really. Number one, we doubled the order, and number two, we had a volunteer with tongs who took, would you like a donut, sir? Yes, and it kept people from eating 4 donuts at a time, so that was good. So that worked out great, and with this growing popularity, we expect next year's event to be equally as successful. We always even shoot for more, but we had, when you consider that we had 50-plus vendors, 56 actually, and a lot of them took up 2 spots for their vehicle and where they laid out their stuff. There were over 75 spaces utilized, so it was really starting to feel like a robust event. July 4th, equally successful. We're building off of last year's celebration. This year we had vendors on Cabrillo Boulevard. We had a sunny weather all day from like 9 o'clock on. Beach crowds were arriving by 10. We had family-friendly music on West Beach. You can see here West Beach was absolutely packed. The weather was fantastic. Light west breeze you can see there. In the upper right kept the smoke from the fireworks moving to the east, so it was a very, very clear and beautiful show. And this is the bands that we're playing. We were working with our nonprofit partners and ended up with a beautiful show. This has really been a departure from years past. This turn toward the family-friendly aspect of July 4th has really turned this into a more and more successful and praiseworthy, if you allow me, the non-humility there, waterfront event. And augmenting that has been the police presence the last couple of years. So this year we had literally numbers approaching 0 law enforcement contacts, which just only adds to the family atmosphere. And also will be next year will be Tuesday and then a Wednesday and then a Thursday, and then we start to get in, 4 years from now, we start to get into the weekend situation again. But honestly, I think the components we've got now, we've got something that's a really great model moving forward. And this year, with the weather included, it was pretty much a seamless event. And finally, I know I've been talking about this for months on end, but I'm happy to report that the rock crab fishery is finally open at the islands and on the coast. There were a lot of hiccups and false starts and island closure while the coast was open, but finally they're open on the coast and at the islands, fully open, first time since last November. Meanwhile, the legislation at the federal level continues slogging its way through committee. I believe it's still in the Appropriations Committee. $138 million earmarked for the everybody affected by the rock crab and Dungeness crab closures up north. And also the other narrative or the other discussion that continues is that between the fishermen and the fish-related businesses and the state regulators and state public health officials and, quite frankly, legislators about what are the appropriate protocols for testing crabs. Should we test the meat instead of the viscera? Can we test the meat and put warnings on the viscera? Because they typically test the viscera and not the meat, even if the meat actually might be fine. There are some folks who do eat the viscera, so it's obviously public health is the number one concern. And what are the thresholds for closing a fishery or reopening a fishery? And some of that had been kind of squishy before this because this is the first real closure, solid closure of the rock crab fishery that anybody could remember. And it was very costly to our $5 million a year small, rock crab fleet, let alone the Dungeness fleet up north that lost hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. So those discussions are ongoing. The Joint Committee on Fisheries and Aquaculture will be meeting again soon at the state level. I will try not to report out to you every month on rock crabs. We must be ill of it by now. But when there are new measures or protocols or regulations pertaining to this fishery or any other for that matter, I'll certainly be here to report it to you. And that concludes my report for this evening.
Bring some with you next time.
I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions or comments? Commissioner Kramer?
Yeah, the fireworks were fantastic. I saw them from the Condor Express, and it was incredible. But I did hear questions or comments, at least from slip holders in Marina 3 about the parking situation. And maybe this should be something for the parking committee down the road. His point was that he couldn't park. And he thought some arrangements should be made for slip holders. And so I am reporting that, and I think maybe we can discuss this, maybe have a way of having special permits or something. I'm not sure what, for the parking committee if it comes about.
Mr. Chair.
I was pretty upset about it.
I understand. Mr. Chair and Commissioner Kramer, actually, we're working with the city attorney on early draft discussions of early draft ordinance possibilities relative to more parking-related issues. I'll be honest with you up front, I doubt that designated parking for slip permittees will be a centerpiece of that discussion, though we are looking at a lot of other options to create more available parking at the harbor, having to do, again, with, vehicles that are stored there forever, campers, people camping. A lot of it's related to camping. A lot of it's related to oversized vehicles. But the problem, you may remember with our discussions at the last parking committee meeting, is that designating parking for slip permittees or Marina 1 or Marina 2 or BAPs or this, that, or the other, anytime the lot fills and there's a single 1 or 2 or 3 of those spaces that aren't utilized, you've got yourself a bigger problem than the one we're discussing right now. So it only happens really a couple times a year. 4th of July is probably in the center of that target. But we're working as we speak to help alleviate that problem bit by bit.
Well, that's great. No, I appreciate, and I'm sure he does, and they all do, that this doesn't happen every weekend. But he said, actually, this past one was not quite as bad as other ones. He said it's particularly bad when there's a swim meet going on. And then slip holders, he said, really have difficulty finding parking then as well. And so I think it's something that should be looked at. And
sure.
I understand what you're saying.
Sure. And also I would advise anybody who had concerns about parking to make sure they visit our website before the event, because it lays out where all the available parking is. For example, I wouldn't say this was your event in particular, but some people may not have known that even though there's signage that there's parking across the street at the La Playa lots at City College and what have you. But your point is well taken, and we are looking at all the time at changing our parking regulations to make sure we maximize use for the public.
There's also, of course, the problem of getting out of the lots once it's over. I know it took me somewhat over an hour to get home, which something takes usually 10 minutes. But that's another question entirely.
Understood. I have the same problem at Dodger Stadium.
Exactly. All right. Any other comments or questions? All right. Thank you, Mr. Cronman. Okay, next item is we have a request from the public, and I see we have a guest here. So would you like to read the recommendation?
Yes, item 7, public request, Craig Cody. Recommendation that Harbor Commission receive and consider a request from slip permittee Craig Cody to discuss the method by which vessels are measured for slip assignments in Santa Barbara Harbor.
Mr. Chair, if you'll allow me, I talked with Craig about this. I have a very brief introduction to this, and then I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Cody.
Okay.
So measurement of vessels overall length and including its appurtenances on the bow, bowsprits, pulpits, bumpkins and what have you, and anything on the stern from outdrives to swim steps and what have you. As precise as we can get on those measurements is very, very important for placing boats in slips for slip assignment purposes in Santa Barbara Harbor. If you look at an aerial view, not this one from 1947, but if you look at an aerial view of the harbor, you can see that it almost looks like those fairways were cut with a scalpel, and that's a result of the Waterfront Department sticking very, very closely to the slip length and maximum size regulations, which are included as an attachment to your report tonight. The way Harbor Patrol measures boats is they measure them down the midline of the vessel, down the deck. Now, there's a mast in the middle, so it's never going to be right down the midline. And what they do is that sometimes it's incremental. You measure to the first obstacle, then you measure, and then you adjust for the length of that, let's say, cabin wall, and then the space in between, and you accommodate for windows and what have you. And so I would be the first one to admit that it's not absolutely precise all the time. But Harbor Patrol does accommodate requests for remeasure. We almost always like to have the owner there unless they ask for a courtesy measurement in their absence and what have you. And so this is very important for the preciseness of this is very important, and sticking to the regulations is important because a quarter of an inch allowance, like if I was to say, sure, Mr. Smith, you can have the extra quarter of an inch, and Mr. Smith's quarter of an inch becomes Mr. Jones or Mrs. Jones, half an inch, and then you've lost it, right? So this is one of those policy deals where we have to be very, very rigorous, but the flip side of that is it's not always absolutely precise. So it does come down, as we all know, who folks who have slips in Santa Barbara Harbor, this is a world of inches and even quarter inches. You see a lot of what people call the Santa Barbara nose job down there, where folks have bow pulpits that have been too long. They've had to, have them, a marine fabricator cut some of it off and refabricate it so that it meets the length regulations. So that being said, in late April of 2016, Mr. Cody had a vessel being measured for his slip, a new boat in his slip, and it was measured 2 or 3 times, as indicated in the watch logs that are attached to this report. And following that, Mr. Cody contacted me and ultimately contacted Jeanette and asked to be put on tonight's agenda to discuss the means by which we measure boats and offer possibly some alternatives to discuss. And so certainly the department and I, speaking directly with Craig, welcome that. Craig's a long-time respected member of our harbor community, so I'm really grateful that he's here tonight, and I guess this would be the time for me to turn over the microphone to him.
Great.
Thank you, Mick. Commissioners and staff, I welcome this opportunity to speak to you. I've been a harbor user for a little over 20 years, and I live aboard. Until recently, I was living aboard my Catalina 36 sloop, and I recently acquired a trawler. This may interest Mr. McCrae. The boat is named Owen Churchill. It was named for the winner of the first Olympic gold medal for sailing for the United States and the inventor of the Churchill swim fins. And so I'm keeping the name of the boat. I brought the boat up, and because of the fact that it had an anchor roller and an anchor on the front of it, I had to go into a guest slip initially. I removed the anchor roller and the anchor, and I measured the boat. I had measured it out of the water during the survey. I hung plumb bobs from the front and the rear of the boat, knowing that I had a limit of 38 feet in that slip. I also measured the beam of the boat. I brought it up and put it into the guest slip, removed the anchor roller and the anchor, and I measured the boat incrementally. I'm not an artist. Starting at the front, I went to the windshield, and then from the windshield, there's a bulkhead directly dead center. There's a doorway here and a window here. And in measuring from here to here, I came up with 37 feet, 11.86 inches. I asked for a courtesy measurement, and two of the Harbor Patrol staff came down and measured the boat, and they came up with a measurement of 38 feet, 1 1/4 inches. So I was 1 1/4 inches over by their measurement. I brought visual aids, if I may. So, in order to pass the measurement test, I started removing parts of the boat from the 38-foot, 1-inch measurement. This is the way that the anchor pulpit or the anchor platform was constructed. These were all chewed up. I was going to take them off anyway and kind of clean this up. This is 4 inches. So after the 38-foot, 1 1/4 inch courtesy measurement, I had these taken off. And I took the boat up to the accommodations dock to be measured, and it was measured by the same Harbor Patrol person. And it was measured at 38 feet, 1 inch after removing the 4 inches. So back to the guest slip, and I cut off 2.5 inches.
You need to stand in front of the microphone.
I went back. Thank you. I went back to the guest slip and cut off 2.5 inches, and went up again. And the boat was measured after cutting off now 6.5 inches, and the measurement was 38 feet 1 inch. It's imprecise, to say the least.
Right.
I did finally then cut off this much, and we came up with 37 feet 11 3/4 inches. After removing what amounts to about 7 inches from the boat. And I had proposed a number of years ago a different sort of a system, which I'm not a model maker either.
Looks pretty good to me.
Assuming that the accommodations dock is square, some sort of a fixture, removable appliance that would have an extendable arm so that they could be adjusted for the different beams of boats. One of these has a table. So you would have the stern of the boat here touching and the bow of the boat there touching. And if you measure between where the plumbs are, I'm just going to do this inaccurately, we've got 22 inches here. And then if you measure on shore from side to side, you've got 22 inches. It may not be perfect, but I think that it would be far more accurate than stretching a tape around obstructions, around parts of structure of the boat, and that sort of thing. After the second measurement, when I was still an inch too big, I had to go back into the guest slip because it was an inch too big. An inch on the length of my boat is 0.2%. I think that we need to be able to figure in a possible inaccuracy of, I don't know, 0.5% or 1% or something of that nature, because it's going to be imprecise even with something like this. This measurement could be done on one of these fixtures with a laser measure. They're about $55 out at Home Depot. Reflecting on something here. Those measured to 1,000th of an inch. I've talked to Mr. Kronman. He said that they're going to be meeting about possible ways of coming up with some sort of a fixture for measuring boats, and I'd be happy to participate in that. And in the case of what it costs to keep a boat nowadays, a mismeasurement, if we're going to round up to the next foot, on the transfer fee is $400. So if they're off by 4 inches, that's going to cost somebody $400.
Okay.
So but it's something that I really think that the city needs to address. I suggested a similar system to this almost 20 years ago to Mike Hatton, and he said, "Well, it sounds too complicated." Mike was the harbor police chief then. So, but I'm happy to put in any input I can, and help in any way I can.
Great. Well, thank you. I've been through that process a number of times myself.
Yeah. Well, especially when the same boat would measure differently 3 different times.
I understand the issue.
Yeah.
And it all depends on whether you measure right the first time or not. If
Right.
you measure right the first time, it's a great measurement system. So I understand that. Do you have
Chair?
any further comments?
Sure, thank you. First of all, I wanted to thank Mr. Cody for the time he's taken to not only think about this, but to put together physical.
Very complicated.
Hey, I couldn't do it. Rather than get into any discussion of who measured right and who measured wrong and what have you, what I'd like to do is let the commission know and Mr. Cody that we already have met Carl and his maintenance supervisor, myself, the Harbor Patrol supervisor, to discuss this. We had the whiteboard, and we came up with something not completely unrelated to what Mr. Cody demonstrated. We called it a caliper system, his first example there. And we did discuss preliminarily a laser system. I don't think it's time to go into the details of all that, what the positives were, what the potential drawbacks were. I think that discussion is better suited for another workshop for meeting number 2, to which we'd like to invite Mr. Cody and have him, let's call this a working subcommittee of our staff, and have Mr. Cody be part of that, because we share his concerns about precision when it comes to this. And the very word precision is the end game here, because what's not going to change, respectfully, I wouldn't recommend it, is any 1% allowances on any end. The goal is precision. We need to be precise, because without precision, we're not going to have precise fairways and navigable fairways and fairways that are appropriate for access and egress and comply with Division of Boating and Waterways guidelines. So, but that option is open, and we'd love to include Mr. Cody in those discussions moving forward.
Great. I think that's a good start. Any comments or questions? Yes.
Mr. Cody, I appreciate what you brought forth. It's funny, when reading this and then discussing it with Mr. Reedman, I had a vision very similar, where you go outside the boat and you measure the space, and then you measure it on land as well. And I think that's a valid process. So I look forward to the group taking this on and finding a precision. I agree with Mr. Croman. It's about precision, not about an allowance. So thank you.
Commissioner McCray.
So I must admit that in my line of work, we deal with having to do with relatively weak measurements, and the first thing we do is to get them as precise as possible. And then the next level of complexity is you take those measurements, especially if they're imprecise, and you start with statistics. And I don't think you want to do 14 measurements and calculate a mean and a confidence interval and then start going there. So I like the fact that the staff has received this input with open arms and is looking at improving the measurement system.
Mr. Kramer?
And I would agree with that. I think it's very great that you guys are working together on this to try to help your situation, but also situations in the future. And so thank you for being so open-minded and willing to listen and so forth.
And I think what I'd like to ask is, when you do come up with something, we'd love to hear about it.
Mr. Chair, I assure you, you'll hear about whatever the product of our discussions are, either way. Because
Great.
It may come all the way back to square one, or we may have a breakthrough. I certainly hope the latter is true.
Great. Thank you.
Some people who still won't like it.
Okay. Let's move ahead here to new business. Would you like to read the recommendation?
Yes, item 8, special event camping permit, Wine and Roses Regatta. Recommendation that Harbor Commission A, review and consider a request for a special permit to allow event participant camping in the Harbor West parking lot from 5 p.m. Friday, August 19th until 5 p.m. Sunday, August 21st during the 2016 Wine and Roses Regatta. And B, approve Wine and Roses event chairman Dre Murray's request for participant camping for the upcoming event as allowed per Santa Barbara Municipal Code section 15.16.090.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, the Wine and Roses Regatta, it's California State Catamaran Championship, which has been held at Ledbetter since 1994. We've done it every summer. It's hosted by the Southern California Hobie Cat Fleets, and the Santa Barbara Yacht Club is involved as well. The way we got into this was the boats and racing equipment on the beach tend to be expensive and could potentially be vulnerable to theft or vandalism. So going back years, we've allowed these folks to camp that weekend in the parking lot, in the Harbor West parking lot, to safeguard their equipment, to keep an eye on their stuff. And it's very convenient for them. And the Harbor Commission has approved these special camping events for this regatta since 1998. Per the municipal code in general, you're not allowed to camp in public places, but Section 15 of the Parks and Beaches, the Parks and Recreation section of the Muni Code, both the Parks and Recreation Commission and the Harbor Commission have the authority and the discretion to override that and post and designated area for camping within the beach jurisdiction. This regatta request is for a 2-day period from Friday, August 19th until Sunday evening, August 21st. It's expected to use 120 spaces of the 199 spaces in the Harbor West lot, and the fee for renting the parking lot will be at full price, $12 a day, just like everybody else. So $1,440. Event participants who arrive early and wish to use the Harbor West parking space prior to 5 p.m. on Friday will pay the Luke's the daily rate of $2 per hour until the lot becomes run by the Wine and Roses management. The regatta is an ocean-independent use, and the waterfront staff has consistently supported the use of this facility for this event. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Question? The same question I ask every year. Any enforcement issues last year?
No, this one goes relatively smoothly. It's a little bit of a trick because just the hardest part is the transition as people are leaving in the afternoon. The Harbor West lot, waterfront employees, and others, and these catamarans are coming in because they're trying to beat the traffic and so forth. So there's a little interaction there, but it all, what do we call it? The magic of boating. It seems to somehow work itself out.
Right,
so.
right.
But we haven't had like breaking bottles and loud parties and fires on the beach and stuff like that.
So no enforcement action by Harbor Patrol or by the PD?
No.
Okay.
I would recommend that we accept this recommendation.
All right. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Passes unanimously. Item number 9. Would you like to read the recommendation, please?
Item 9, annual mooring report. Recommendation that Harbor Commission receive a staff report on the status of the department's East Beach mooring program.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, annually we try to bring to you just a general update on the mooring area, regulatory changes, activities out there, water quality, and what have you. And that's my purpose here tonight. As those of you who were on the commission for the last few years probably remember that prior to January of 2015, the city rules required that any time the number of mooring permits, the number of mooring permittees declined to 30 or fewer in the mooring area, that the waterfront would undertake a lottery to replenish that, to build it out again. And so the department conducted 5 lotteries between 2006 and 2013, and we incrementally assigned some moorings. Some people would drop out of the program. But at Harbor Commission meetings in late 14 and early 2015, we had a vigorous discussion about the idea of eliminating that mooring lottery process in favor of a first-come, first-served method for people walking through the door to request and ultimately be assigned a mooring permit. In the beginning, we thought the demand would be overwhelming for moorings, and so that's why we established the lottery permit and the lottery system. And indeed, a lot of people signed up for lotteries, but for the following 3 reasons, we recommended going to the first-come, first-served. First, only a small minority of people who signed up for the mooring lotteries were selected and ranked in those lotteries ever followed through and proved up. And I think it might have been, a good idea in their head, and once they found out it cost $5,000 to set up the mooring and what have you, they got sticker shock, or they realized that bobbing around out there in the open ocean isn't for everybody, though it is for some, certainly the folks we have out there now. And second, the amount of staff time involved with this was considerable. Jeanette was one of the primary people involved in this, and cost-wise, it was on the order of hundreds, if not thousands of dollars a year to send out reminders to some people, to send out offers. A lot of these were registered mail, return receipt requested. Those are about $6 a pop, something like that. And so that got to be time-consuming for staff and expensive. And finally, during the periods between the official lotteries, people would come to the front counter and say, "Can I get a permit for the mooring area?" And we would have to tell them, "No, I'm sorry, you have to wait till the next lottery." And we weren't really keeping a waiting list, and so they would sort of fall into the mist, and maybe it was a lost opportunity for them and for the department. So ultimately, Harbor Commission forwarded the recommendation to City Council to move to a first-come, first-served mooring permit assignment protocol, if you will. And since then, what's happened is, by the way, this slide you're looking at here now is our current snapshot of the mooring area. white is vacant, single hash is occupied, double hash is off the table where there were seafloor obstructions, okay? So since the city council adopted this new method of first come, first serve, we've remained fairly stable. We have 21 mooring permittees out there. We had, about that amount you can see here over the last few years. It's fairly stable. But the good news is we have people coming in and out who we sit down and explain the program with. They go home, they either, pick it up and decide to move forward, or they keep it hip pocket, or they discard the idea. It's a much smoother way, much more efficient way of dealing with this. A couple people have dropped out of the program. A couple people have signed up since the first come, first serve. We think this is the new model, and we think it's working. It's efficient. It saves time. It saves money. And so we're happy with the way it stands. I would have hoped and expected that 21 would be a 25 by now or something like that. But it's certainly not broken, and we like the where it's at. So in terms of activity in the mooring field, rarely do we ever have a boat break loose. But in March of this year, a boat did break loose from its mooring and hit the beach. Luckily, it was pulled off the beach and taken into the harbor where repairs could be undertaken, and it's back out on the moorings. The reason it broke loose, though, and this is an important reminder for folks who are interested in this program, wasn't because any of the basic mooring tackle failed, right? It was because the line connecting the mooring to the boat, which we call the pendant, the mooring pendant, failed. And if you notice in the ground tackle specifications that were adopted as part of the mooring permit program in 2006 and attached to your staff report tonight, I think it's number 13, but it's the one on the back that's in red. And I didn't put it in red tonight. It's in red for every slip permittee it's number 12, who is given a packet of information in this ground tackle specs are in it. It's that you have to routinely and consistently maintain that pendant, because that is the weakest link in the chain. And once the pendant goes, the boat's on the beach. You can have a rock-solid mooring and rock-solid anchoring gear. And so that's why this is a lesson for this individual, but it's an ongoing lesson for people who are out in the mooring area to pay close attention to their pendant and its attachment to the boat, okay? Because they will chafe if you don't have good chafing gear. And even though they might be approved by an inspector 6 months later, if it's worn through, you need to stay on it and keep watching it. Water quality, I'm happy to report that, and you heard this during the Clean Marina report this spring, we've had 10 years of good water quality results in the East Beach mooring area. This was required by the Coastal Commission that we test for bacterial contaminants and heavy metals out there every year. And we've tested clean for 10 years, and part of the Coastal Commission permit says that if we test clean for 10 years, that they'll forego or waive that requirement. We've hit 10 years, and so moving forward in 2016, we won't be doing that water testing out there this year. And next spring, you'll see an $8,000 savings when I present to you our annual Clean Marina report. And that'll be a considerable enhancement to our Clean Marina program. And finally, in 2015, I'm happy to report that all the mooring inspections were undertaken on time, and all the mooring gear was either repaired or judged to be appropriate and satisfactory in good working condition. And that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Comments? Questions, anybody? Great. Thank you very much.
I have one question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Commissioner.
Do you have any thoughts, Mick, of doing occasional spot checks on water quality out there?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Kramer, we could. It would cost some money, but my suspicion is that it would test clean. The other side of that coin is if we don't routinely patrol out there, but Harbor Patrol does go into the anchorages and the mooring area on a rather routine basis.
Out there.
And if we see any dumping going on, we'll be all over it.
Oh, okay.
So I guess that's the best answer I can give you. But otherwise, we'd have to undertake a rigorous program like we have been for the last 10 years.
I understand that. It just seems maybe not totally wise to say that there won't be any more checks. And maybe people think that there might be spot checks, that they would keep being careful.
We can certainly take that under advisement. Maybe when we do one or two of our in-harbor checks, our dry season water quality checks, we can go out there and grab a sample and just note where it was taken and run. We can't afford to do the heavy metals test, but we can run the bacterial indicators.
Well, I was thinking more of the bacterial
Yeah.
aspect of it.
Yeah, we can do that.
Great.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other comments, questions? Okay. So that brings us to commission staff communications. Anything, Mr. Weidman?
Mr. Chair, I probably shouldn't get into a big discussion about this, but I did have something from staff, and since it's not on the agenda, we shouldn't probably beat it to death. But several weeks ago, you might remember, I sent out an email and a PowerPoint presentation. I've been attending some Finance Committee meetings as the council and the Finance Committee, were deliberating on the budget, and then after budget adjustments and things like that. Commissioner McCray hadn't been sworn in yet, so I can certainly get you that information, but I didn't send it to you. I mean, you had been appointed, but you hadn't been seated, so I didn't send it to you, or Mr. Commissioner Sly. And I promised I'd have some more update at this meeting, and I don't. So that's where it stands. Nothing seems to be moving. I had my meeting with Paul Casey this morning, and he says we don't expect, there's so much going on right now at the Finance Committee level that he doesn't expect the Finance Committee will be get ready, will be prepared to make a recommendation to City Council on the proposal. And I'm sorry, I got the cart in front of the horse on this one. What this is regarding is a possible fund shift of Waterfront Department paying for the MTD Waterfront Shuttle. And the Waterfront currently pays for the leg of the Waterfront Shuttle, I'll call it the west leg from Stearns Wharf to the harbor. Very little used, seldom used part of the MTD electric shuttle program. The proposal that the Finance Committee was presented with by Transportation and Streets staff, Public Works, was to have Waterfront pick up the east leg of the shuttle from the wharf to the zoo, and have the downtown parking enterprise pick up the State Street portion of the electric shuttle, which is by far the most expensive. It's about $900,000, if I recall. So this could be a $200,000 to $250,000 fund shift to the Waterfront to pay for the shuttle, but it sort of ended there, and they went on to other topics. So I don't have any more news than that. That it's been presented by Public Works to the Finance Committee, and they haven't formed a recommendation on that yet. And I'll keep you in touch when I find out what meetings it'll be discussed, in case you would want to attend, and I'll certainly report out from those meetings on that. But I didn't just want to let it disappear.
Okay. Would the Waterfront have some say in the schedule, or how many?
Yes, the discussions we've had at the staff level, and again, nothing's been decided, and it's, we're going into new territory here, would be that since the bulk of it's going to the downtown parking, that the downtown parking committee and Waterfront would work together on perhaps reducing the scheduling. The first thing I said was, we'll eliminate it.
Right.
That's choice number one, no project alternative. So, looking carefully at what makes sense, because the ridership is down.
Right.
Has been down. And so we would be working with the downtown parking committee was one idea that we discussed, so that we would have some input into scheduling, fares, and whatnot.
Yeah.
Look at the ridership and look at what makes sense.
Or have a say in developing a criteria of at what level does ridership need to get to maintain a line or eliminate a line.
And MTD, to their credit, keeps meticulous records of ridership per hour, on each leg of this thing. And so I've requested that information and received it, and So there you have it.
Okay, great, thank you. Anything else?
That's it.
Okay. Anything else from our side? I had one thing, and we touched on it earlier. We did have a local coastal program update meeting. What was it, a week or so ago, a week and a half ago? And where that program stands, let me back up. So the program started about the beginning of the year with the hopes of having something concrete about this time to present to the commission and the public in general. Well, the planning staff made some, we met several times, we made, redlined up some documents. They sent that to the Coastal Commission, and the Coastal Commission came back with a whole bunch of changes and new requirements and things like that. Not new requirements, but they amplified some of the stuff outside of the comments that were given. And so the planning staff is working with the Coastal Commission right now to go through some of those things and see which are flexible and which aren't. And so at some point in the future, we will have a presentation from the planning staff here at the Harbor Commission on that. And I assume we will continue to meet. We have been meeting quarterly, but it may be longer than that, depending on how long the planning staff has to work with the Coastal Commission. So that's it. Anything else, Mr.? Okay. Anything else? Okay. Would someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
I would make a motion.
Second? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Cody, for your thoughtful presentation.